Hello, dear readers. Welcome to another literary journey that will transport us to a distant era, but one that carries eternal lessons for our hearts. Today we're going to live a story of hope, love, and second chances in the wild territory of Wyoming in 1874. Imagine a desperate woman with two small daughters, lost in the relentless cold of an American winter, searching for rotten apples to survive. But sometimes, it's precisely when we hit rock bottom that we find the strength to be reborn. This is a story about how love can flourish even in the most arid soils of life. Tell me in the comments, where are you watching this story from? I love knowing how many different hearts this narrative will touch around the world. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave that like so more people can discover these stories that nourish the soul. You make all the difference. Now take a deep breath and prepare to dive into the year 1874 in the territory of Wyoming, where the freezing winds carry not just snow, but also destinies that intertwine in unexpected ways. Year 1874. Location: Wyoming Territory, United States. The Wyoming wind cut like invisible razors through the worn fabric of Martha Whitman's coat. Her hands, cracked by December's cold, trembled as they rummaged through the pile of rotting apples behind the abandoned barn. The sour smell of decomposing fruit mixed with the approaching snow's aroma, creating an olfactory symphony of despair. Annie, 9 years old, held the small hand of Grace, 7, both watching their mother with eyes that had lost the sparkle of childhood somewhere on the infinite road between Ohio and this desolate place. Their stomachs rumbled in unison, a cruel music that accompanied the creaking of the old barn's wood. "I found some that might still be good," murmured Martha, more to herself than to her daughters. Her voice was a ghost of what it had once been when she sang lullabies in the warm cottage in Ohio. Now, 4 months after beginning the journey in search of Charles, every word that came from her mouth seemed to carry the weight of all the hopes that had been buried along the way. Wyoming's sky stretched grey and infinite above their heads, like a torn canvas that let through only cold and loneliness. The distant mountains rose like sleeping giants, indifferent to the suffering of the small human beings wandering through the frozen valleys. Martha cleaned a partially rotten apple on her worn skirt, removing the brown parts with fingers made skillful by necessity. She was an alchemist of survival, transforming rot into hope, even though that hope had a bitter taste and soft texture. Snow began to fall in large, heavy flakes, each one a small promise that winter would have no mercy on 3 women lost in the vast territory. Martha raised her eyes to the sky and for a moment, just a moment, allowed herself to remember Charles's words before leaving. "I'll be back before the first snows, Martha. We'll build our house in the Silver Mountains." The first snows had arrived weeks ago. Grace began to cry softly, an almost inaudible murmur that was lost in the whisper of wind through the bare tree branches. Annie, trying to be the brave older sister, pulled her closer and whispered something in her ear. Words that Martha couldn't hear but which she imagined were empty promises that everything would be all right, like Charles's words. Martha closed her eyes and felt the weight of every wrong decision that had brought her here. The decision to sell the house in Ohio, the decision to believe they could find Charles somewhere among the immense western territories, the decision to keep walking even when the money ran out, even when hopes began to shatter like dry leaves in the wind. But when she opened her eyes, she saw her daughters looking at her with a confidence she didn't deserve, but which kept her standing. Grace had stopped crying and Annie held her hand tightly, as if she could transfer her own courage to her younger sister. Martha bit into the rotten apple. The bittersweet taste exploded in her mouth, and she forced a smile for her daughters. "Let's find a place to spend the night," she said, and this time her voice carried a determination that surprised even herself, because sometimes, when we reach the bottom of the well of despair, we discover there's still one more step down, or that someone extends their hand to us. Samuel Henley was carrying hay for the cattle when he heard the sound. It wasn't quite crying, but something more subtle, the broken murmur of human voices mixed with the wind. He stopped, tilted his head, and felt his heart quicken. He had learned during the war years that survival often depended on paying attention to sounds that didn't belong to the environment. He let the bundle fall and followed the sound, his leather boots sinking into the fresh snow that covered the ground like a white silent sheet. His breath came out in small vapor clouds, and he pulled his wool coat tighter to his body as he rounded the abandoned barn that lay at the edges of his property. It was there that he found them, 3 human figures bent over a pile of rotten apples like shadows of a desperate prayer. The woman because it was clearly a woman despite the oversized men's coat, raised her head when she felt his presence. Her eyes were like two deep lakes where all the world's sadness had settled. The two girls shrank behind their mother, like wounded birds seeking protection under the wings of an eagle that had forgotten how to fly. Sam felt something break inside his chest. It was the same sensation he had experienced 4 years earlier, when he buried Elizabeth in the small cemetery behind the house. The feeling that the world could be too cruel, too unjust, for small, fragile creatures to survive alone. "Mom," he said, removing his hat in an automatic courtesy that his mother had taught him before the war took away all the rules of civility. "Are you and the girls all right?" Martha tried to straighten up, an attempt at dignity that made Sam's heart contract even more. She held a rotten apple in her hands as if it were a treasure, and there was a brown juice stain at the corner of her mouth. We're just passing through," she said, and her voice was like torn silk, beautiful but damaged. "We didn't want to bother anyone." Sam looked at the two girls. The older one had her mother's eyes, but still carried a spark of hope that life hadn't yet managed to completely extinguish. The younger one was trembling, and it wasn't just from cold. "When was the last time you ladies had a proper meal?" asked Sam, and the question came out gentler than he had intended. Martha hesitated, as if a proper meal was a concept she had completely forgotten. It's been a few days," she finally admitted. Sam nodded and made a decision that would change 4 lives forever. "Come with me," he said, extending his hand. "My house isn't a palace, but it has hot food, fire in the fireplace, and a solid roof, and it's starting to snow hard." Martha looked at the extended hand as if it were a mirage that could disappear at any moment. "We can't accept charity," she said, but her voice trembled on the word charity, betraying how much she wanted to accept. "It's not charity," Sam replied, and saying it he realized it was true. "It's humanity, and we all need it from time to time." The snow began to fall harder, as if the sky wanted to make the decision for them. Sam kept his hand extended, patient as he had learned to be during the long months on battlefields, waiting for Martha's dignity to find a way to coexist with desperate need. It was Annie who broke the impasse. The 9-year-old girl stepped forward and placed her small cold hand in Sam's large calloused one. "Thank you, sir," she said with a formality that made Sam smile for the first time in weeks. And so, while the snow transformed the world into a silent white fairy tale, 4 lost souls found their way home. 12 days had passed since Sam Henley's house had gained the sound of feminine voices. 12 days of shared breakfast, of stories whispered near the fireplace, of comfortable silences that filled the corners of the room with a warmth he had forgotten existed. Martha had transformed into a kind of domestic fairy, moving through the house with gentle and efficient gestures. She washed, cooked, and mended, as if she wanted to pay for hospitality with silent perfection. Annie helped Sam with the cattle, asking endless questions about the cows and horses, while Grace had adopted the farm cat as her personal confidant. But it was on the morning of the 12th day that the past came knocking at the door in the form of the territorial mailman, a thin man named Peterson, who carried news through the frozen valleys as if he were a messenger of destinies. Sam was repairing a saddle on the porch when Peterson approached, mounted on his bay horse, the mail pouch swaying to the rhythm of his ride. There was something in the man's posture that made Sam frown. "Got mail for one Martha Whitman," Peterson said, taking a yellowed envelope from the pouch. "They say she's staying here." Sam's blood froze. He took the letter and saw the official seal of the Montana Territorial Mining Company. The paper was yellowed and stained, as if it had traveled a long time or passed through many hands. "Thank you, Peterson," Sam murmured, but the mailman was already moving away, as if he wanted to distance himself from the news he carried. Sam entered the house holding the letter as if it were a bomb about to explode. Martha was in the kitchen, stirring a pot of soup that exhaled aromas of rosemary and potatoes. The homey smell contrasted cruelly with the official coldness of the envelope in his hands. "Martha," he called, and something in his voice made her turn immediately. She saw the letter, and her face paled until it matched the color of the snow accumulating on the window. Her hands, which held the wooden spoon, began to tremble. "Is it from him?" she asked, and there was so much fear and so much relief in her voice that Sam felt his heart break. Sam handed her the letter without saying anything. There were moments in life when words were useless, and this was one of them. Martha opened the envelope with fingers that trembled like leaves in a storm. The paper made a dry noise as it unfolded, a sound that echoed in the kitchen like an omen. Sam saw the exact moment when the words struck her heart. He saw how her eyes widened, how her lips parted in a small, O of devastating understanding. He saw how she read the letter once, then again, as if the words might change meaning on the second reading. The letter fell from her hands like a dead leaf. "He's dead," she said, and her voice was a whisper that carried all the weight of the world. January 15th, mind collapse. Sam did the math mentally and felt destiny's cruelty like a stab. January 15th. Martha and the girls had begun their journey in September, walking behind a man who had been dead for almost a year. "He saved $63, she continued, reading the details with a mechanical voice as if the words belonged to someone else. $63 for the last 8 months of his life. Martha let herself fall into a chair, and for a moment, Sam thought she would collapse completely, but instead she began to laugh, a low laugh, without joy, that was more frightening than any crying. "I've been chasing a ghost," she said. "All this time, all this way, chasing a ghost." Annie and Grace appeared in the kitchen doorway, alerted by the strange sound of their mother's laughter. They looked from Martha to Sam, trying to understand an adult language of pain they didn't yet know completely. "Mama," said Annie, and her little voice broke the terrible trance Martha had fallen into. Martha looked at her daughters, and something changed in her face. The pain was there, raw and real, but there was also a determination that Sam recognized. It was the same expression he had seen on the faces of wounded soldiers who refused to give up. "Your father," she began, but her voice failed. Sam stepped forward. "Why don't we sit in the living room?" he suggested, extending his hand to Martha with the same gentleness he had shown that first day behind the barn. Some conversations need to be had near the fire, and while flames danced in the fireplace, consuming dry branches and transforming them into light and heat, a shattered family discovered that sometimes the worst news can be the beginning of completely new stories. The men arrived on a February morning when the cold was so intense that the very air seemed to shatter when breathed. There were 3 of them, mounted on horses that seemed as hard and merciless as their owners. The leader was a middle-aged man with a scar that cut across his left cheek like a dry river, and his eyes had the cold color of metal. Sam was splitting wood when he heard them approaching. The sound of hooves on packed snow had a threatening rhythm, different from the casual trot of neighbors who occasionally came to visit him. He left the axe embedded in the log and walked to the porch, keeping his hands visible but close to the rifle that always rested against the wall. Martha was in the kitchen preparing bread when she heard male voices talking with Sam outside. Something in the tone of the conversation made her stomach contract. She dried her hands on her apron and approached the window, peeking through the linen curtain she had sewn during the long winter afternoons. "We're looking for Martha Whitman," said the scarred man, and his voice carried the harsh authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "We heard she's staying here." "And why are you looking for her?" asked Sam, and Martha could hear the controlled tension in his voice. "Her husband owed money to our boss," the man replied. $400 from a poker table in Butte. We've come to collect." Martha felt her blood freeze in her veins. Charles and his cards, Charles and his promises that he would stop gambling, Charles and his golden dreams that always ended in nightmares. Even dead, he could still haunt her. "The man is dead," said Sam, and there was something dangerous in his voice now. "You can't collect debt from the dead." "Oh yes, we can," replied the second man, younger but with equally hard eyes. "The widow inherits the debts along with whatever's left. It's the law." "And if she can't pay?" asked Sam. The scarred man smiled, and the smile was worse than a direct threat. "There's always a way to pay, friend. Always." Martha felt a chill that had nothing to do with Wyoming's cold. She knew men like these, had crossed paths with them in the towns she'd passed through. Men who saw women as merchandise, who turned desperation into profitable business. Annie and Grace were playing in their room, oblivious to the approaching danger. Martha looked at them and made a decision that would change everything. She opened the door and stepped onto the porch. "I'm Martha Whitman," she said, raising her chin in a display of courage she didn't feel. "And I don't have $400. The 3 men examined her as if she were an animal at market. The leader dismounted with calculated movements, approaching her like a predator who had found his prey. "Don't need to have money, missy," he said. "There are other ways to settle debts." It was then that Sam stepped forward, placing himself between Martha and the man. When he spoke, his voice had the icy tone that Martha had only heard once before, the night he told about the war. "I don't think you understood me clearly," Sam said. "The lady is under my protection, and I don't accept threats on my property." The scarred man laughed, but the sound had no joy. "Protection? And who are you, farmer?" Someone who's already killed better men than you for worse reasons, Sam replied, and there was a cold truth in those words that made the three visitors exchange glances. It was at that moment that Bill Crawford appeared on the road, followed by two other local farmers. They came riding as if they knew exactly what was happening, and Martha realized that Sam had sent a signal while she wasn't looking. "Any problem, Sam?" asked Bill, stopping his horse in a position that blocked the three men's exit. The debt collector's leader looked around, calculating the odds. 5 armed and determined men against 3. The odds weren't in their favor. "This isn't over," he said, mounting his horse again. "We'll be back with the sheriff." "Do that," Sam replied. "Sheriff Peterson is my friend. He'll be interested to know there are men trying to extort honest widows in his territory." The 3 men left, but their threats floated in the frozen air like toxic smoke. Martha felt her legs weaken when they disappeared from sight. Sam caught her by the arm, supporting her before she fell. "It's over," he said, and there was a promise in his voice. "As long as I'm here, no one will ever threaten you or the girls again." And at that moment, Martha understood that protection sometimes comes in the form of quiet men who split wood at dawn and kept rifles clean and loaded. Spring came to Wyoming like a whispered promise, melting snow into small streams that sang through the valleys and bringing shy green back to the pastures. Martha was in the garden behind the house, planting the tomato seeds Sam had bought in town, when she realized she hadn't thought about Charles for 3 consecutive days. Guilt hit her like a slap. Her hands stopped mid-movement, still holding a tiny seed that seemed to contain all the promise of future summers. How could she be planting new hopes when the old ones were still so fresh in memory? "Mama, look!" Grace ran to her, golden hair flying in the wind, holding a small wounded bird she had found near the barn. "Can we take care of it?" Martha looked at her 7-year-old daughter and saw how she had changed during these months in Sam's house. Her cheeks were rosy and full again, her eyes sparkled with genuine curiosity, and there was a confidence in her movements that had disappeared during the months of hunger and uncertainty. "Let's ask Sam," Martha replied, and realized how natural it had become to speak his name, as if he had always been part of her daily conversations. Sam was in the corral, teaching Annie to ride a gentle mare named Honey. The 9-year-old girl sat in the saddle with upright posture, following his instructions with the seriousness of an applied student. "Keep the reins firm, but don't pull," he was saying. "Honey is smart. She knows where you want to go before you even decide." Martha approached the fence and observed the scene. There was something in Sam's patience, in the way he explained things with the same attention he would give an adult, that made her heart warm in a way she hadn't expected to feel again. Annie saw her and waved enthusiastically. "Mama, look! I can do it by myself." And she could. She was guiding Honey around the corral with sure and determined movements, as if she had been born in a saddle. Martha felt a pang of pride mixed with melancholy. Charles would never see this. He would never see how his daughters were growing, how they were transforming into strong and capable young women. "She's a natural horsewoman," said Sam, approaching the fence where Martha was leaning. "Has the instinct in her soul." There was something in the way he spoke about Annie, a genuine affection that didn't try to replace anything, just add to it. Martha realized he had found a way to love the girls that honored Charles's memory instead of competing with it. "Grace found a wounded bird," Martha said. "Do you think—" "Of course," Sam replied, before she even finished the question. "Let's see what we can do." During the days that followed, the house transformed into a kind of improvised hospital for the small thrush Grace had adopted. Sam built a temporary cage, Martha prepared small portions of appropriate food, and Annie read aloud to the bird, convinced that literature would help in its recovery. It was during one of these reading sessions, on a lazy afternoon when the sun entered through the windows, creating golden patterns on the wooden floor, that Martha noticed Sam was watching her. She was sitting in the rocking chair near the window, mending a shirt of his that had torn while fixing the fence. There was something intimate about that gesture, something that made her blush without knowing why. "Martha," he said, and there was a hesitation in his voice she had never heard before. "Yes," she replied, without lifting her eyes from the mending. "Have you ever thought about staying?" The needle stopped mid-stitch. Martha raised her eyes and met Sam's gaze, and at that moment all the air in the room seemed charged with unspoken possibilities. "Staying?" she repeated, as if the word were in a foreign language. "Here, with us." "With me," he said, and there was a vulnerability in his confession that made Martha's heart race. "I know it's still early. I know you're still mourning, but—" "Sam," she said, and her voice was barely a whisper. "I've fallen in love with you," he said, the words coming out in a rush as if he had held them for so long that now he couldn't contain them anymore. "With the girls' laughter in the house, with the way you sing while cooking, with the way you're here, real and alive, filling spaces I didn't even know were empty." Martha let the sewing fall to her lap. Her hands were trembling, but not from cold. "I don't know if I'm ready," she admitted. "You don't need to know," Sam replied. "We can figure it out together." Outside, Grace was shouting with joy because the bird had tried to fly for the first time. Annie was applauding, and Honey was neighing in the corral as if she wanted to join the celebration. And there, in that simple moment of a spring afternoon, Martha understood that love sometimes doesn't come like a storm. Sometimes it grows slowly, like the seeds she had planted in the garden, creating deep roots before you even realize they're there. April brought with it more than wildflowers and the return of migrating birds. It also brought Peterson, the mailman, with news that would make Martha confront the first real crossroads of her new life. "The roads to Montana are open," he announced, accepting the coffee Martha offered him in the warm kitchen. "First spring convoy leaves next week. If you still want to retrieve your husband's money." Martha felt her stomach contract. During the winter months, the $63 Charles had saved seemed like a distant and abstract amount. But now, with the real possibility of recovering them, the money gained weight and meaning again. $63. It was enough to start over somewhere new, to rent a small room in a town, and perhaps find work as a seamstress or washerwoman. It was the independence every widow dreamed of having. "But I wouldn't travel alone," Peterson added, stirring sugar into his coffee with thoughtful movements. "There are rumors that the Sioux have been attacking isolated convoys. It would be safer to wait until there was a larger group." Sam was outside, fixing the barn roof, but Martha knew he could hear every word of the conversation. She had learned to recognize the small signs of his presence, the rhythm of hammering that slowed when something important was being discussed, the way he cleared his throat when he was worried. After Peterson left, Martha was alone in the kitchen with the weight of a decision she didn't want to make. The girls were playing in the yard, their voices mixing with the sound of wind in the trees that were beginning to bud. It was a sound of pure, uncomplicated happiness. Sam entered through the back door, removing his hat and hanging it on the hook he had installed especially for her when they arrived. Small gestures of consideration that had become precious in their simplicity. "You're going," he said, and it wasn't a question. Martha looked at him, trying to decipher if there was accusation or sadness in his voice, but there was only acceptance, the same resignation she had seen on the faces of soldiers who knew a battle was lost before it even began. "I don't know," she replied honestly. "It's his money. It's all that's left of him." "No," Sam said, approaching the table where she was sitting. "The girls are what's left of him, and they're here." There was a truth in those words that Martha couldn't deny. Annie had developed Charles's habit of whistling while working. Grace had his eyes, that honey color that changed with the light. They carried the best of him, purified of his weaknesses and multiplied by their innocence. "But what if we need the money?" she asked. "What if something happens to you? What if—" Sam sat in the chair next to her, his calloused hands covering hers in a gesture that had become familiar. "What if the sky falls? What if the sun doesn't rise tomorrow?" he said, and there was gentle irony in his voice. "You can't live in the land of what-ifs, Martha. I tried. It nearly killed me with sadness." She knew he was talking about Elizabeth, about how he had spent years blaming himself for not being able to save her from tuberculosis. Sam had learned the hard way that the future was always uncertain, but that wasn't reason not to try to build something beautiful in the present. "If you want to go, I'll escort you," he said. "But if you want to stay, if you want to try to build something here with me and the girls, then marry me, Martha, officially. So everyone knows you and the girls are my family, and anyone who wants to hurt them will have to go over my dead body." It was a marriage proposal without flowers or romantic promises. It was a marriage proposal like a survival contract, a practical alliance forged in necessity and tempered by genuine affection. Martha looked at his hands covering hers. They were hands that had built shelter when they needed protection, that had prepared food when they were hungry, that had held weapons when they were threatened. "What if I can't love you the way you deserve?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Sam smiled, and there was quiet wisdom in his expression. "Then we'll discover what kind of love we can build together," he replied. "Sometimes love isn't about intensity. Sometimes it's about choice, choosing every day to build something together, even when it's difficult." Outside, Annie was teaching Grace to whistle the same melody Charles used to whistle. They missed the notes and laughed at their own mistakes, and there was something in their persistence, in the way they kept trying until they succeeded, that made Martha understand something fundamental about second chances. "Yes," she said, and the word came out with more firmness than she expected. "Yes, Sam Henley, I want to stay. I want to try." And when he leaned in to kiss her, Martha realized that some choices don't need to be perfect. They just need to be right. Reverend Mackenzie arrived on a chestnut horse on a May morning when wildflowers painted Wyoming's fields with colors that seemed borrowed from paradise. He was a tall, thin man with graying beard and kind eyes that had seen much life on the trails between the territory's isolated settlements. Sam had sent for the itinerant pastor, through Bill Crawford, who knew the religious man's roots better than anyone in the region. The wedding would be simple, he said, just the necessary words to make official what had already grown naturally between them. Martha was nervous in a way that surprised her. It wasn't the nervousness of a young woman marrying for the first time, but something different and more complex. The anxiety of someone deliberately choosing a future different from what she had imagined for herself. She had spent the morning preparing a dress that had belonged to Elizabeth, found in a trunk in the attic. It was a simple dress of navy blue cotton with white lace details, preserved with care and love. Martha had to take in the waist and adjust the sleeves, but when she looked at herself in the small bedroom mirror, she saw a woman who didn't seem completely lost. "You look beautiful, Mama," said Annie, arranging the wildflowers Grace had picked for the improvised bouquet. "Papa would be happy to see you happy." It was the first time Annie had mentioned Charles so directly since they received the letter about his death. Martha knelt before her daughter and held her small face between her hands. "Are you sure you're okay with this?" she asked. "With Sam becoming officially part of our family?" "He's already part of our family," Grace replied, appearing in the bedroom doorway with Sam's cat in her arms. "We're just missing signing the paper." Martha smiled despite the tension she felt. Children had a simple and direct way of seeing the world that was sometimes wiser than all adult philosophy. The ceremony was held in the living room, with Bill Crawford and his wife Clara as witnesses. Clara had brought a simple honey and cinnamon cake, and Bill contributed a bottle of whiskey he had been saving for a special occasion. Reverend Mackenzie spoke about the different types of family, those we're born into and those we choose, and about how love sometimes comes quietly, like a gradual dawn instead of a sudden lightning bolt. "Samuel Henley," said the pastor when the moment for vows arrived, "do you take Martha Whitman as your lawful wife, to protect, honor, and love in all circumstances that life may bring you?" "I do," Sam replied, and his voice was firm as mountain rock. "Martha Whitman," the Reverend continued, "do you take Samuel Henley as your lawful husband to support, honor, and love in all circumstances that life may bring you?" Martha looked into Sam's eyes and saw there not just affection, but something deeper and more lasting. The silent promise that he would be a fortress when she needed protection, a harbor when she needed rest, and a companion when she needed someone to share life's burdens. "I do," she said, and meant every word. After the ceremony, while the adults talked and the children played in the yard, Martha found herself alone in the kitchen for a few minutes. She was washing coffee cups when Sam appeared behind her. "Mrs. Henley," he said, and there was a smile in his voice. "Mr. Henley," she replied, turning to face him. For a moment they just looked at each other, aware that something fundamental had changed between them, not just legally, but emotionally too. There was an officiality to their relationship now that made everything more real and simultaneously more frightening. "I made a promise to the girls," Sam said, "that I would never try to replace their father, that I would just be Papa Sam." Martha felt her eyes fill with tears, but they were tears of gratitude, not sadness. "They're lucky to have two fathers who love them," she said, "one in memory and one in life." That night, after everyone had gone home and the girls were sleeping, Martha and Sam sat on the porch watching the stars that dotted Wyoming's sky like diamonds scattered on black velvet. "It won't be perfect," Martha said, more to herself than to him. "It doesn't need to be perfect," Sam replied. "It just needs to be real." And there, in the comfortable silence of the night, while the wind whispered secrets among the leaves and crickets sang their serenades, a new family was officially born, not from blood or overwhelming passion, but from the conscious choice to build something beautiful and lasting from the broken pieces of previous lives. 2 years had passed since Martha changed her surname from Whitman to Henley, and life had assumed a serene rhythm she had never imagined possible. It was a September morning in 1876, when she felt the first signs that something new was growing inside her. She was in the garden harvesting the last tomatoes of the season when nausea hit her like a sudden wave. She leaned against the garden fence, breathing deeply the fresh morning air, and it was then that the possibility occurred to her, like an unexpected ray of sunshine. Annie, now 12 years old, had become a voracious reader who devoured all the books she could find at the small-town school. She constantly talked about becoming a teacher, about traveling to distant territories, bringing education to pioneer children. Sam nourished these dreams, buying her books whenever he went to town and listening with genuine attention to her opinions about literature and mathematics. Grace, at 10 years old, had transformed into a talented horsewoman who rode Honey as if they had been born together. She had developed a special talent for working with injured animals, transforming the barn into a kind of improvised hospital for hurt creatures that appeared on the property. Sam had built special cages for her patients, and Martha often found Grace talking seriously to a wounded squirrel or an orphaned owl, as if they understood each other's language perfectly. The ranch had prospered under Sam's careful administration. Charles's $63 had been invested in purchasing additional land and improving the cattle. Sam had become one of the most respected farmers in the region, known for his honesty in negotiations and his willingness to help neighbors in difficulty. But it was at the moment when Martha confirmed her suspicions about the pregnancy that she realized how completely her life had been transformed. She was preparing dinner when Sam arrived from work, bringing with him the smell of hay and horse that she had learned to associate with safety and home. "Sam," she said, without lifting her eyes from the stew pot she was stirring, "we're going to have a baby." The words came out simple and direct, without beating around the bush or dramatics. Sam stopped mid-motion of hanging his hat, as if time had frozen for a moment. "A baby," he repeated, and there was a mixture of joy and amazement in his voice. "Next summer, by my calculations," Martha said, finally turning to face him. Sam crossed the kitchen in 3 strides and pulled her into his arms, spinning her in the air like a much younger man. When he set her back down, there were tears in his eyes. "Elizabeth always wanted children," he said, and there was no sadness in mentioning his first wife, just quiet gratitude for the fact that old dreams sometimes come true in unexpected ways. Annie and Grace received the news with the enthusiasm of children who had learned that family was something that could grow and expand without being diluted. They immediately began making plans for the baby, discussing names and building an improvised crib with wooden crates. The baby was born on a July morning in 1877 after a long but uncomplicated labor. It was a robust boy with Sam's dark eyes and a tuft of brown hair that shone golden in the sunlight. "Charles Samuel," Martha said when the pastor arrived for the baptism. "Charles for the father the girls lost, Samuel for the father they gained." Sam held his son in his arms with the same reverence with which he held the most delicate tools, as if he understood he was carrying not just a baby, but the tangible future of everything they had built together. It was during the baptism, held in the new church the community had built over the previous 2 years, that Martha looked around and realized how integrated they had become in the territory's life. Bill Crawford had become like a brother to Sam. Clara was her confidant and closest friend. The girls had friends at school, and Sam had been elected to the Territorial Council, recognized for his integrity and good sense. They had created deep roots in land that initially seemed too arid to sustain life. That night, after all the visitors had left and the baby was sleeping in the crib Sam had built with his own hands, Martha sat in the rocking chair on the porch, watching the stars and reflecting on the extraordinary journey that had brought her there. 3 years earlier, she'd been eating rotten apples behind a barn, desperate and lost, chasing the ghosts of broken promises. Now she was the wife of a respected man, mother of 3 healthy and happy children, part of a community that valued and respected her. "What are you thinking about?" asked Sam, joining her on the porch. "I was thinking about how sometimes we lose everything to find what we really needed," she replied. "How sometimes what we think is the end is just the beginning of a completely different story." Sam nodded, understanding what she meant, without needing additional explanations. And there, in the comfortable silence of Wyoming's night, under a sky full of stars witnessing ancient promises and new hopes, a family born from loss discovered that happiness sometimes comes not as a destination, but as a daily journey of small choices and consistent acts of love. It was on a September night in 1877, 3 years after that terrible afternoon behind the barn, that Martha found herself alone on the porch, rocking Charles Samuel, who had awakened restlessly. The 2-month-old baby now slept peacefully in her arms, and she took advantage of the tranquility to let her thoughts wander the trails of memory. The sound of soft footsteps on the porch wood announced Sam's arrival, coming from the last round with the animals. He moved with the silent precision of someone accustomed to not awakening a house full of sleeping children. "Can't sleep?" he asked, sitting in the chair next to her. "I was thinking," Martha replied, adjusting the baby in her arms. "Do you remember the day you found me?" Sam made a low sound of agreement. How could he forget? The image of those 3 figures bent over rotten apples still visited him sometimes in dreams, not as a nightmare but as a memory of Providence that had changed all their lives. "I was so desperate," Martha continued, her voice low so as not to wake the baby. "So lost that I didn't even know who I was anymore. I just knew I needed to keep the girls alive one more day, then another, then another." She paused, looking at the stars that shone like small beacons in the dark immensity of Wyoming's sky. "And now look at us," she said, and there was genuine wonder in her voice. "Annie was accepted to normal school in Cheyenne. She's going to graduate as a teacher, Sam. Our girl is going to teach other children to read and write." Sam smiled in the darkness. Annie had worked tirelessly during the previous 2 years, studying by candlelight after the housework was finished. Her determination to educate herself had inspired the whole family, and when the acceptance letter arrived, everyone cried with joy. "And Grace," Martha continued, "yesterday she saved a foal that was born with an injured leg. Dr. Mason said he'd never seen a girl with such instinct for healing animals. He said she could be a veterinarian if she wanted. It was an almost impossible possibility for a girl in the territories, but Sam had learned not to underestimate the determination of the Henley women. "And you," Martha said, turning to look at him directly, "became the most respected man in the territory. The territorial council, the new school you helped build, the way neighbors come seeking your advice." "Martha," Sam began, but she interrupted him. "Let me finish," she said, her voice loaded with an emotion she rarely allowed herself to express completely. "You saved us, not just from hunger or cold or the men who wanted to hurt us. You saved us from losing ourselves completely." The baby moved in her arms, making small sleeping sounds, and Martha rocked him gently until he calmed again. "You know what the most impressive part is," she said. "You never tried to save us. You just welcomed us, as if we were seeds that just needed fertile soil and time to grow." Sam extended his hand and gently touched her face, his rough fingers tracing the line of her cheek with a tenderness that still surprised her after all these years. "You saved me too," he said. "This house was so quiet before you all arrived, so empty that I had forgotten that houses are made to be lived in, not just inhabited." They remained silent for a moment, listening to the night sounds of the territory, the distant howling of coyotes, the whisper of wind in the leaves, the soft creaking of the wood of the house that had become home for all of them. "Sometimes I'm afraid," Martha admitted. "Afraid that it's too good, that something will go wrong." "Maybe," Sam replied, "but if something goes wrong, we'll face it together. And until then, we'll live each day as if it were a gift, because that's exactly what it is." Martha looked at her son in her arms, then at the house where Annie and Grace slept safely in their beds, then at the man beside her, who had chosen to love not just her, but all the complexity of her reconstituted family. "I'll never completely understand," she said, "how eating rotten apples behind a barn led me to the richest life I've ever dreamed of having." "Maybe," Sam suggested, "it's because you never gave up looking for food to feed your daughters. And sometimes when we're looking for one thing, we find something completely different that was exactly what we needed." And there, on the porch of a house that had become sanctuary, under a sky that seemed to bless their heads with thousands of stars, Martha understood that gratitude isn't just a feeling. It's a way of seeing the world that transforms even losses into steps toward future joys. The spring of 1878 brought changes that tested the strength of the roots the family had created. Annie, now 15 years old, was about to leave for Cheyenne to begin her studies at normal school. It was an opportunity that had cost 2 years of careful savings, but which represented everything they believed about education's power to open new worlds. Martha was on the porch polishing the leather suitcase Sam had bought for Annie to carry her books and clothes to school. It was a beautiful suitcase, with bronze buckles and reinforced corners, the type of luggage a respectable young teacher should carry. "I'm scared, Mama," said Annie, sitting on the porch steps with Grace beside her. Martha stopped polishing and looked at her eldest daughter. Annie had grown and become a beautiful young woman with the determined eyes she had inherited from Charles and the confident posture she had developed under Sam's tutelage. But there was still vulnerability in her confession, the natural uncertainty of someone about to leave everything she knew in pursuit of bigger dreams. "What are you afraid of?" asked Martha, sitting down next to the girls. "That I'm not smart enough," Annie admitted. "That I'll discover dreaming about being a teacher is different from actually managing to be one." Grace, at 12 years old, had become the family's practical voice. She looked at her sister with the seriousness of someone much older. "You're the smartest person I know," she said. "You read books whose titles I can't even pronounce. And besides, you explain math to me better than any teacher at school." Sam appeared at the house door carrying Charles Samuel, who at 10 months was beginning to take his first wobbling steps. The baby had become the family's joy, with his easy smile and insatiable curiosity about everything around him. "May I give my opinion?" asked Sam, and there was something in the formality of the question that made them all look at him with attention. "Of course, Papa Sam," Annie replied, using the title she had created for him and which never failed to move him. "When I was in the war," Sam began, "I was afraid every day, afraid of dying, afraid of not returning home, afraid of not being brave when I needed to be. But I learned something important. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's doing what needs to be done despite the fear." He sat in the porch chairs, settling Charles Samuel on his lap. "You've wanted to be a teacher since you were little," he continued. "You want to bring knowledge to children who might be as lost as you were when you arrived here. That's a noble dream, Annie. And you have so much knowledge and kindness to share that it would be a terrible waste to let fear stop you from trying." Martha observed the conversation with her heart full of pride. This was the family they had built, one where dreams were nurtured, fears were discussed openly, and support was given without conditions. "Besides," added Grace, always practical, "if it doesn't work out, you can always come home." "We'll be here," Annie smiled, and it was as if the sun had come out from behind clouds. "When you put it that way," she said, "it seems less scary and more adventurous." In the days that followed, the house transformed into a center of preparations. Martha sewed new clothes for Annie, Sam fixed her suitcase and added extra compartments, and Grace prepared a collection of small gifts and letters so her sister wouldn't feel alone in the first months. The night before departure, the family gathered in the living room for one last conversation. Sam had lit a fire in the fireplace even though it was spring, because some occasions called for the symbolic warmth of dancing flames. "I want you all to know," said Annie, looking at each of them, "that everything I learned about strength, kindness, and perseverance, I learned here, with you. When I teach other children, I'll be sharing not just books and mathematics, but also the lessons our family gave me." Martha felt tears prick her eyes, but they were tears of pride, not sadness. "You'll come home whenever you want," said Sam. "But I also want you to know you have permission to fly as high and as far as your dreams take you. This house will always be yours, but the world can be too." That night, after everyone had gone to sleep, Martha and Sam stayed awake on the porch, watching the stars and reflecting on how the family had grown and evolved. "She's going to be a wonderful teacher," said Martha. "She will," Sam agreed. "And when Grace decides to follow her own path, whether with animals or whatever else she chooses, we'll support her too." "And Charles Samuel?" asked Martha. "What kind of man do you think he'll become?" Sam smiled in the darkness. "Hopefully one who learned from a young age that families are built with love, not just blood, and that second chances are sometimes the best chances of all." And so, while their first daughter prepared to fly from the nest, Martha understood that creating a successful family didn't mean keeping everyone together forever. It meant giving them roots so deep and wings so strong that they could choose to return home because they wanted to, not because they needed to. The winter of 1878 brought more snow than Wyoming had seen in years, but it also brought something that warmed the Henley house more than any fireplace: Annie's weekly letters from Cheyenne. Martha had developed the ritual of reading the letters aloud during dinner, transforming meals into windows to the larger world their eldest daughter was discovering. Grace listened with fascinated attention, asking questions about the other students, the teachers, and the big city that seemed so different from ranch life. "Dear family," Martha read on a December afternoon while snow fell outside like sifted flour, "classes are going well, although they're more challenging than I imagined. We're learning not just how to teach mathematics and reading, but also how to understand each child's different needs." Sam smiled while cutting meat for Charles Samuel, who at 18 months insisted on trying to eat alone and managed to spread more food on his face than in his mouth. I met a girl named Sarah Mitchell, Martha continued, whose parents died of typhoid fever last year. She's being raised by an aunt who has 5 other children and works in a laundry. Sarah is brilliant, but sometimes falls asleep during classes because she stays up late helping care for younger cousins. Grace stopped eating and looked at her mother with a thoughtful expression. Like our situation when we arrived here, she said. Martha nodded, remembering the exhaustion she felt when the responsibility of keeping her daughters alive fell entirely on her shoulders. I told Sarah about you all, Martha read, continuing the letter, about how you found a new family when you thought you had lost everything. She said it gave her hope that her situation might also improve. Continue, said Sam, and there was gentle urgency in his voice. Sarah reminded me how lucky I am to have a family that believes in education. Yesterday she told me, "You're going to be a wonderful teacher because you understand what it feels like when the world ends, and whoever understands that can help other people discover that sometimes new and better worlds are just waiting to be built." The kitchen fell silent for a moment, except for the sound of Charles Samuel banging his spoon on his plate. "Our girl is learning much more than pedagogy," said Sam, and there was pride in his voice. The letters became a tradition that lasted all through Annie's years of study. Through them, the family followed not just her academic progress, but also her growth as a person. She wrote about orphan children she encountered, about immigrant families struggling to learn English, about the poverty she saw in Cheyenne's streets, and about her growing determination to make a difference in the world. It was in a March 1880 letter that Annie announced her decision to accept a teaching position in a small town called Green River, almost 200 kilometers away. "I know you expected me to come home after graduation," Martha read aloud, her own voice trembling slightly. "But there's a school in Green River that desperately needs a teacher. The previous one left in the middle of the school year to get married, leaving 23 children without education." Grace, now 15 and clearly following her own dreams of working with animals, looked at her parents with concern. "Doesn't she want to be part of our family anymore?" she asked. "Of course she does," Sam replied, cleaning Charles Samuel's hands with infinite patience. "But being part of a family also means serving something greater than ourselves. Annie learned that here." "Green River is a small town in a mining region," Martha continued reading. "Many of the children have never had formal education. Some can't even read their own names. When I think of them, I remember how I felt when I didn't know if I could keep you all fed. I remember how everything changed when someone decided to help us without expecting anything in return." Martha stopped reading and looked at Sam, who was watching her with that understanding expression she had learned to value. "She's right," he said. "It's exactly what Elizabeth would have done. It's what you would do. It's who we raised her to be." And Martha knew he was right. They had raised Annie to be strong enough to leave the safety of home when something greater called, but also to carry with her the values and love she had learned in the family. "Please don't think I'm going away," Martha finished reading. "I'm taking all of you with me. Every lesson Papa Sam taught me, every story you told me, Mama, every adventure Grace and I lived, every smile from Charles Samuel. I'm going to teach these children using everything I learned about love, patience, and second chances." That night, as the family prepared for bed, Grace approached Martha in the bedroom. "Mama," she said, "when it's my turn to follow my own path, will you let me go too?" Martha hugged her daughter and felt how she had grown, how her arms were longer and her voice more mature. "My love," she said, "we raised you to fly. It would be cruel to clip your wings now just because we're afraid to see you leave." And so, through the letters that arrived faithfully every week, the family learned that true love isn't possession, but freedom. The trust that the people we love carry our values with them wherever they go, and that the home we build together will always be strong enough to receive them back when they want to return. It was a June afternoon in 1881 when Martha found the girl. She was returning from town with Charles Samuel, now a chattering 4-year-old who asked constant questions about everything he saw, when she heard a familiar sound coming from behind the same barn where Sam had found her 7 years earlier. Martha stopped the wagon and listened carefully. It was the muffled sound of someone crying softly, trying to be quiet, but unable to completely contain the desperation. "Mama, why did we stop?" asked Charles Samuel, his brown eyes curious and alert. "Wait here for a moment, dear," said Martha, getting down from the wagon. She walked around the barn with careful steps, and there found a sight that made her heart jump. A girl of perhaps 8 years old, too thin, with torn and dirty clothes, searching for something on the ground among the debris and weeds. The girl raised her head when she heard Martha approaching, and her eyes revealed the same kind of desperation Martha remembered feeling in that terrible place so long ago. "Hello," Martha said softly, the same way Sam had spoken to her. "Are you all right, dear?" The girl tried to straighten up in an attempt at dignity that broke Martha's heart. I'm just looking," the girl said, her voice small and frightened. "Looking for what?" "Anything to eat," the girl admitted, and began crying again. "My mother is sick and can't get out of bed. We haven't had food for 2 days. Martha felt as if time had folded upon itself, creating a perfect circle. She extended her hand to the girl with the same gentle gesture Sam had used with her. "What's your name?" she asked. "Lucy," the girl replied. "Lucy Morrison." "Well, Lucy Morrison," Martha said, smiling, "how about coming home with me and having something hot to eat? And then we'll see what we can do to help your mother." Lucy looked at the extended hand with the same hesitation Martha remembered feeling, the struggle between desperate need and wounded pride. "We're not beggars," Lucy said, echoing the same words Martha had used. "I know," Martha replied, "and this isn't charity, it's humanity. And we all need it from time to time." When they returned home, Sam was in the corral teaching Grace to evaluate a young horse they had recently bought. Grace, at 16, had become so competent with animals that neighboring farmers already sought her opinion on veterinary problems. Sam saw Martha arriving with the unknown girl and immediately understood the situation. His eyes met Martha's over Lucy's head, and she saw in them the same understanding and kindness that had saved her own family. "This is Lucy," Martha said. "She and her mother need help." "Of course," Sam replied, as if receiving needy strangers was the most natural thing in the world. "Grace, can you help Lucy wash up while your mother prepares something to eat?" Grace came down from the fence with the natural grace she had developed over the years and smiled at Lucy. "Come on," she said. "I have soap that smells like roses, and afterward you can help me feed the horses if you want." During dinner, Lucy told her story between hungry mouthfuls of stew. Her mother had contracted pneumonia during the harsh winter and hadn't been able to work since. They had spent all their savings on medicine and were now facing eviction from their small room in town. "Where's your father?" asked Charles Samuel, with a child's innocent curiosity. "He died in a mine explosion last year," Lucy replied simply. Martha and Sam exchanged meaningful glances. It was a story too familiar, echoing the experiences of so many families in the territories, where life was precarious and fortune could change quickly. After dinner, Sam prepared the wagon to take Martha and Lucy back to town to get Lucy's mother. They found Helen Morrison in a tiny cabin, feverish and weak, but with the same determined eyes as her daughter. "I can't accept charity," Helen said when Martha explained her offer of temporary shelter. "It's not charity," Martha repeated, using the exact words Sam had used with her. "It's what people do for each other when they can." It took 2 weeks of constant care for Helen to recover enough to get out of bed. During that time, Lucy had become part of the family routine, helping Grace with the animals, playing with Charles Samuel, and eagerly absorbing the reading lessons Martha offered her. "She's smart," Grace observed one evening, while helping Martha wash dishes. "She learned 3 new words just today." "Reminds me of you at the same age," Martha said, always hungry for knowledge. It was when Helen finally recovered completely that Martha made a proposal she had been considering since the first day. "We heard the school needs someone to help with cleaning and meal preparation," she told Helen. "The job comes with a small house behind the school, and Lucy could study while you work." Helen looked at Martha with tears in her eyes. "Why are you doing this for us?" she asked. "You don't even know us." Martha looked out the window where she could see Sam teaching Charles Samuel to lasso at a practice fence, Grace helping Lucy feed an orphaned calf, and felt Annie's invisible presence through her weekly letters. "Because someone did this for us once," she said simply, "and we learned that kindness isn't something you keep to yourself. It's something you pass on." And so in that summer of 1881, Martha understood that the rotten apples behind the barn had been just the beginning of a much larger story, a story about how simple acts of kindness create waves that spread through time, touching lives in ways we can't always predict or measure. It was a misty September morning in 1882 when the letter arrived that would forever change how Martha saw her own story. Charles Samuel, now 5 years old, was playing in the yard when Peterson, the mailman, approached with his usual expression of someone carrying more than just correspondence. "Got a letter for you, Martha," he said, but there was something different in his tone. "It's from Montana, from the Butte Sheriff's Office." Martha felt a chill run down her spine. 8 years had passed since she received the news of Charles's death. What could the Montana sheriff want with her after so long? She opened the letter with slightly trembling hands, and the first line made her world shake. Dear Mrs. Henley, we are writing to inform you of a recent discovery that may be of interest to you. Sam was in the barn when she ran to him, holding the letter as if it were a bomb about to explode. He saw the panic in her eyes and immediately dropped the tool he was using. Martha, what happened? Read, she said, extending the letter with trembling hands. Sam read silently, and Martha saw his expression change from concern to confusion, then to something that seemed like amazement. Is this true? He asked. The letter explained that during a renovation of the old mining company office where Charles had worked, they had found a metal box buried under the floorboards. Inside was a significant amount of money, almost $1,200, along with a letter written in Charles's own hand. There's more, Sam said, unfolding a second sheet that had been attached to the sheriff's letter. It was Charles's familiar handwriting, but different from anything Martha had ever seen from him. There weren't the grandiose words and extravagant promises that usually characterized his letters. Instead, there was a raw humility and honesty that made her question everything she thought she knew about her husband's final months of life. My dear Martha, Sam read aloud, if you're reading this, it means something happened to me and you discovered where I hid our savings. I know you must be surprised. I'm surprised myself that I managed to save so much money. Sam stopped and looked at Martha, who was pale as paper. Continue, she whispered. I promised I would stop gambling, and this time I kept that promise. I haven't touched a card or dice since I arrived here. Every penny I earned went into this box, except what was necessary to survive. I wanted to prove to you and to myself that I could be the man you deserved. Martha felt her legs weaken and leaned against the barn door. I know I made terrible mistakes in the past. I know you had reasons to doubt me, but I wanted you to know that your dreams of a better life changed me. Even here, alone in the mountains, I carry your hope with me every day. My God, Martha murmured. He really changed. He really stopped gambling. If something happens to me before I can return home, this money is for you and the girls to build the life you always deserved. Buy a house with a big garden for Annie to read under the trees. Buy books for Grace to learn about the animals she loves so much. Buy everything I never managed to give you. Sam stopped reading because Martha was crying now, tears coming from a place so deep she didn't know it still existed. And Martha, if you find someone who treats you better than I did, marry him. Don't carry my memory like a chain. Carry it like a blessing and allow yourself to be happy again. The silence that followed was broken only by the distant sound of Charles Samuel playing and Grace talking to the horses in the corral. He knew, Martha said, her voice breaking. Somehow, he knew he might die and wanted me to move on. Sam carefully folded the letter and put it back in the envelope. The man who wrote this truly loved you, he said, and it seems he found a form of love that was greater than his own flaws. Martha looked at Sam, this man who had become the center of her life, and felt a deep understanding form. You didn't save me from Charles, she said slowly. You completed what he began. He gave me the strength to survive. You gave me the strength to live fully. That night, Martha sat on the porch with Charles's letter, reading it several times under starlight. There was no more anger or bitterness, just a gentle sadness for the life he might have lived if he'd had more time to grow into the person he was becoming. Sam joined her after putting Charles Samuel to bed. What are we going to do with the money? He asked. Martha looked at the house where her family slept. Grace, who wanted to study veterinary medicine. Charles Samuel, who deserved every opportunity they could give him. Annie, working in Green River, but still part of every family decision through her letters. We're going to build the future, she said, for all our children, for Lucy Morrison and her mother, for any family that needs second chances. And so on a misty September morning, Martha discovered that sometimes stories have layers that only reveal themselves years later, and that true love, both Charles's and Sam's, can transform even the most unexpected endings into new beginnings full of possibilities. It was a golden October afternoon in 1885 when Martha found herself again behind the abandoned barn, but this time accompanied by a very different group. Annie had come home for a special visit, her first in 2 years, and the whole family wanted to show her what had been built with the money Charles had left. The barn, once a symbol of despair, now housed a small but thriving school that served children from 6 families in the region. Grace, at 21, had become the territory's first licensed veterinarian after studying by correspondence and taking exams in Denver. Charles Samuel, now 8 years old, was the school's most dedicated student and showed the same love for books that Annie had displayed. "It's hard to believe," said Annie, looking around, "that this place where you almost starved to death became a place where children learn to read." Martha smiled, holding Sam's hand with the naturalness born of 11 years of partnership. "Maybe it's exactly as it should be," she replied. "Places where we hit bottom sometimes become the strongest foundations for building something new." Lucy Morrison, now a 15-year-old young woman, came running up. She had become Grace's assistant and showed promising talent for working with animals. Her mother, Helen, had married Bill Crawford the previous year after Clara died of pneumonia, creating a new blended family that functioned with the practical harmony that characterized territorial life. "Mrs. Martha," Lucy said, breathless with excitement, "Grace says she has a surprise to show the family." Grace appeared a few moments later, carrying a basket covered with a white cloth. There was a mysterious smile on her face that made everyone approach with curiosity. "Do you remember the first animal I saved here?" she asked. "The wounded bird when I was 7 years old." "How could I forget?" Martha replied. "You read to it every day until it recovered." Grace uncovered the basket, revealing 3 thrush chicks with soft feathers and eyes bright with curiosity. "These are descendants of that bird," she said, and there were tears in her eyes. "5th generation. He returned here to build his nest every year, and now his descendants do the same. As if this place were home to them too." Sam looked around the small valley where they had built their lives and saw not just the barn transformed into a school, but also the house they had expanded 3 times, the corral where Grace cared for injured animals brought by farmers from throughout the region, the garden where Martha grew not just vegetables, but also the flowers that decorated the church on Sundays. "You know what I'm thinking?" he said, addressing Martha. "What?" "I'm thinking that maybe Charles knew something we didn't when he wrote that letter," Sam said. "Maybe he knew you were strong enough not just to survive, but to transform survival into abundant life." Annie looked at her parents, because that's how she had learned to think of Sam, and at her siblings, and felt a deep understanding for them. "Do you know what I learned in all these years of teaching?" she said. "I learned that the best lessons aren't about mathematics or grammar. They're about how ordinary people make extraordinary choices every day, how a desperate mother can transform into the matriarch of a prosperous family, how a lonely farmer can become the pillar of a community, how frightened children can grow up to change the world around them." Charles Samuel, who had been listening with the seriousness of an intelligent child, stepped forward. "Mama," he said, "can you tell me again the story of the rotten apples?" Martha looked at her son and saw in him not just the mixed features of Charles and Sam, but also something new, a curiosity about the world, and confidence in his ability to make a difference that she recognized as the greatest gift they could have given him. "Once upon a time," she began, "there was a woman who thought her story had ended when it was actually just beginning, and as the sun set over Wyoming, painting the sky with colors of gold and rose, Martha Henley understood that some stories have no end. They just keep expanding, touching new lives and creating waves of kindness that spread far beyond what the eyes can see. She had begun as a lost woman, eating rotten apples behind an abandoned barn. Now she was the respected wife of a territorial council member, mother of children who were changing the world around them, and the kind of person others sought when they needed hope or second chances. And the most wonderful thing of all was that she knew this was just one story among thousands, that somewhere at that moment other people were hitting bottom and discovering that sometimes it's exactly there that we find the strength to build lives we never dreamed possible.